attack on Ukraine, with at least 3 civilians killed and 25 injured in Kyiv, in Kherson, and President Zelensky's hometown. Well, Russia has used artillery and ballistic missiles, according to Ukraine's defense ministry. Critical infrastructure has been damaged, leaving thousands without public transport and electricity. Ukraine's foreign ministry says 6 diplomatic missions to Kyiv were also damaged in the attacks. Well, let's speak to Michael Bociurkiw, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Michael, great to have you on the programme again. In terms of your reaction, I know you've been speaking to a number of people there in Kyiv. This was a huge attack, wasn't it?
Indeed, Matthew. In a war where several red lines have already been crossed, this should be regarded as a pretty big one. You're right. I spoke to contacts in Kyiv today, and they said this was different than anything else they've experienced in terms of the power, the vibrations that they felt deep down in bomb shelters. But in terms of where it struck, this is the heart of the international business community in Kyiv, the Wall Street, if you will. And I hope that the business community will see it that way, that a red line has been crossed, maybe for the time being, de-emphasize the reinvestment, rebuilding of Ukraine, and focus more on how to push Russia back before more damage is done. Ratchet up those sanctions a lot more, push ahead with war crimes prosecutions, and very, very importantly, not allow Ukraine to be pushed into negotiations with Russia that it's believed Russia will not honor. So a lot of points here to cover, but it's a huge, huge red line that was crossed today. Oh, and in addition also to the so-called Notre Dame of Kyiv, St. Nicholas Church being heavily damaged as well.
I'll come back to some of those political points in a moment, but in terms of what has been hit, again, because it's not a new tactic, going after the energy infrastructure, and that, of course, comes on the coldest day of the year. I mean, there are really harsh consequences, aren't there, for so many people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've just been through the cold snap where we had very, very little power in cities like Odessa, and families without means cannot cope for 12 plus hours a day without power. And the Russians seem to be timing this exactly when those cold snaps happen, so maximizing the pain to civilians. But again, I can't emphasize enough is, if this isn't stopped anytime soon, where will the economy go? Where will that investment environment that people hoped would be alive whenever the war ends? How can business be assured, international business, that it's safe to come into Ukraine after what happened today?
Now, Moscow said this attack is in response to the use of US missiles in southwest Russia. It is interesting because in that interview that Donald Trump gave to Time magazine only a few days ago, he called allowing the use of US weapons on Russian targets as crazy. And then the Kremlin today saying Trump's comments fully align with Moscow's position. When you hear that, what do you think?
Well, I don't believe anything Donald Trump says anymore. We should have learned our lesson in Trump 1.0. But I think the feeling in Ukraine from talking with my contacts there is the next 6 months are actually the way they describe it as black, because no one knows what exactly will happen. If you wanted me to take a guess on what might happen, I think Mr. Trump, wanting to present himself as the master of the art of the deal, will push Mr. Putin towards some kind of settlement. It's very possible that Mr. Putin will say, no way, we want more. And then Mr. Trump, in a best case scenario, will come to Kyiv and say, OK, we'll give you everything you've been asking for. And by the way, not this drip, drip, drip approach that's been followed by the Biden administration. So that would be a best case scenario for Kyiv, I think, at the moment.
What do you think are the critical decisions European capitals need to make? Because Putin only yesterday was talking about his willingness to compromise, but made the point that Zelensky had to compromise as well. We are in really critical moments of this conflict, aren't we?
Indeed. In fact, the new EU foreign chief, the former Prime Minister of Estonia, has said that Ukraine should not be pushed into peace talks. And even if Russia, calls for a demilitarized zone and peacekeepers, they're not the ones keeping the peace. So I think also what's happening, Matthew, here is that Ukraine and the surrounding area is paying the price for lack of military investment in these various European economies. There just isn't enough muscle to defend themselves, and also Ukraine under attack. And if this war goes further, and a lot of us expect it will go beyond Ukrainian borders, the way Russia is ramping up their military-industrial complex right now, it's going to be a very, very tough conflict for Europe to respond to by itself.
Michael, always great to have you on the programme. Thank you so much for talking to us here on today's Verified Live.